Okay, we're going to talk about the basic animation within Vizrt T5. And before you can get to anything more advanced within animation techniques, you need to know the fundamentals, and that's what we'll cover right now. As you can see, we have a scene open. We are in our Viz Engine renderer mode, and we're going to create an animation here. Now, the animation will relate to what we're working with within the stage window. There's going to be basically 3 windows involved in here, and you could use the scene editor window to create your animations, or you can use the transformation editor as well. Along with that, we're also going to be within the stage, using the stage as well. First, we're going to create an animation here, left to right with the cube. We have our timeline here. This is 0. This is where I want the timeline to start at 0. So I just rewind it, and I'm going to set keyframe right here by using this button, and that will set the keyframe. I have my animation to automatically advance 50. We could set that to whatever we want. I'm going to leave it at 50. I'm just going to do this through the scene editor window. We could do it 2 ways. We could click and drag this cube and just click it to the right, or we could come into the transformation window and use our position X to do it. So either way, clicking and dragging within the scene editor window, and or clicking and dragging and or clicking the numerical value within the transformation editor. Once I have that at the right, I can set keyframe again, and once we do that, 2 things happen. We have 1, an animation icon that gets put onto our container to let us know that there is an animation, and number 2, down here within our stage, we now have an animation. We can zoom in on the stage using our middle mouse button and or using the zoom to whole spline button here within the stage. As you can see, when I zoom to whole spline, it fills the stage with the spline. Okay, so this is our basic animation, and what we have here are 2 keyframes which are represented by these 2 buttons here at the beginning and the end, and in between there is a bar that lets us know that there is an animation. Keyframe 1, keyframe 2, and the bar in between that lets us know what the animation is. This bar, it tells us what the animation is positioned. Now at any time, once we have an animation, we can create keyframes and additional keyframes right within the stage, as opposed to making changes up in the scene editor window and hitting the set keyframe button. So down here within the stage, if I wanted to add a keyframe anywhere in between my 2 keyframes, I could come up into the stage window buttons and click add keyframe, and that will add the keyframe. Now anytime we have a keyframe or add a keyframe, we can come down here to the parameters and adjust it. So I'm going to adjust this parameter on the Y to make it the cube go up a little bit. We also have our Z and X that we could adjust too. So if we wanted to readjust this on the Z or X, we could. And we have an angle and a weight down there for our keyframes. We'll cover that in an additional video. If I wanted to add another keyframe right here, I could just advance my timeline bar. We're going to hit add keyframe. Here's our keyframe. We can click on that keyframe, and again, we can make changes here. Either pushing it up on Y, pushing it back in Z. So anytime you can go up and replay your animation by hitting the little play bar up there, and it will give you a real-time preview. And once we have our bounding box on, we have an animation. You have your animation selected. It will give you your animation spline path up here, and you can also make changes to that right up in the scene editor window too with this animation path by grabbing the handles and or keyframe points and just sliding them around. Now once we do have things on the stage, notice there are 3 parts to this. 1, we have this thing called a director, and this is created by default anytime we create an animation. Now it also shows us our container name here, which is the cube. So that's letting us know what container it is. And it also tells us what the animation property is. Here it tells us position. Now when we click on the animation bar and highlight it, we get a set of icons up here that are different when we click on the director. So the animation and then the director has different icons. Now that I have the director selected, I have an option to add a stop point or a tag point. And when I do that, it adds an upside down triangle here, and it has a black bar letting us know that this is a stop point. When we hit play, you're going to see that this timeline bar reaches that stop point and stops. That means we use the continue button for this to keep going. And we can hit continue, and now that animation will continue on. We can add keyframes or animations or additional parameters to animate right within our stage. Once we have an animation, we can right click on the property type and it brings up new options for us. Number one, we have an option to delete this cube, which would delete that animation in cube. Two, we have a transformation here, and since we already have the position animating, it's grayed out. We could also add a rotation and scaling, and we'll come back to do that in a second. Container, we have an option to turn this container off or on. So active would relate to this eyeball here, it would turn that off. We could also add a material if we were in the classic mode. And then down here for the cube, which relates to this container icon in particular, the geometry on the container, we have a lot of options. We could turn the back, bottom, front, left, right, top, sides on or off, whatever we need. We also have an adaptive tessellation, bevel, size X, size Y, and these settings there are going to relate to what we have within our cube setting, since that is the property. If we right click again, we also have an option for a shadow caster, a shadow receiver, and a material definition. Now we have the caster and receiver up there because on our container within the scene tree we have the caster and receiver plugins. So if I wanted to add an animation down here, I could come in and certainly add it this way. I want to add a rotation, so I'm going to click on rotation, and what it does is adds 2 keyframes here automatically for us, and now we have a rotation. So at one of these keyframes I can click on it and highlight it, and it brings up our keyframe editor down here, and we can use this editor, which would be the same as coming into your transformation editor, and manipulate the variables here. So if I wanted to have this rotate around while it's moving left to right, I could come in here, adjust that number, and since we had the keyframes already set up, it filled in the animation between the keyframes. And if we use our timeline bar here, you can see that it added that animation. We hit play, again it starts moving to the right. It stops at that point because we have a stop point, and now we're going to hit continue, and it's going to continue on. Pretty much any variable can be animated within Vizrt. So I'm going to come in and right click on the cube, and we could also say I want to adjust things like the size X perhaps, and once we do that it adds a size X parameter with 2 keyframes here, and all we have to do is click one of the keyframes and make some sort of value adjustment down here. So if I wanted to decrease the X size a little bit on the cube as it animates, we could do that. So now it starts out as a true cube, and then by the time it gets to the end it's a little bit skinnier. At any time you want to delete any of these animations, you can just drag that right to the trash can right there. Now the one problem with our scene right now is that it's going to rotate and it's going to stop. So maybe we want to separate this out from the position and rotation. And in that case, this is where the directors come in handy. So we have one director here that we renamed, that was created by default. I can add a new director by clicking or dragging, and then we can rename this one as well by right clicking. We'll call this one rotation. Now what we're going to do, open up that other director, and we're going to slide our rotation into this new director. So now what is going to happen, we're going to rewind our timeline to the very beginning. We're going to come up into our director window here, since we have more than one director now. I'm going to make sure that both of my directors are highlighted, and I'm going to hit play. I could hit play through the director window and or our scene editor window. So I hit play, and you can see that it's going to start, but it stops in that position but keeps rotating. And that's because the stop point is stopping the position, but it's going past the rotation. Now if we wanted to continue the rotation forever and ever, we could click on that animation parameter between it, and then we get our looping and our swing animation, which we could increase indefinitely. And we'll cover more of this on a different video, but just to show you, as we hit play again on both of our directors, it's going to start the animation, it's going to go right. The timeline bar down here continues to play the looping animation while it's stopped right in the middle there. And then once we hit continue, it's going to go off and continue that animation to hit these keyframes. Lastly, since we did have two directors now and we have this director window, we can come up into our director window and choose which director we want. If I wanted to play both, we could do several things. We could highlight one, we can hit Control, click to highlight another, we could hold down Shift to highlight them all, or we could come down here to highlight all, and that will highlight all. As I mentioned, you could hit the play button up within this window, or you can also hit it within this window once it is open. We have all selected, which means it's going to play all directors. I hit play, we can stop it there, we'll rewind it. Now if I only wanted to play the rotation, I could come up here and hit only play rotation, and down here within our stage, the red bar would move while the position bar in our director would stay the same. So I hit play, you can see the red bar is moving down here. The rotation animation is playing, but the position animation is not, because we have our animations separated out into a director.